Madrid, July 1975. The heat is oppressive, hanging heavy over the Almudena cemetery, a thick, suffocating blanket that seems to trap the echoes of a previous era. Around an open coffin, a crowd of aging men raise their arms in a stiff, rhythmic gesture that the world had supposedly buried 30 years prior beneath the rubble of Berlin. They sing songs dedicated to a leader who died in a bunker, their voices cracked with age, but fueled by a defiant, lingering fire. They are mourning Otto Skorzeny, the man propaganda, once christened the most dangerous man in Europe, a title he wore as armor long after the war had ended. The air is thick with the scent of lilies and the stale breath of a dying ideology, as the sun beats down on the scar-faced commando's final departure from a world he had terrorized and manipulated with equal fervor. But observe the crowd closely. Beyond the theatrical displays of old-world fascism, the paradox of the post-war era is standing right there, hidden in plain sight, a silent witness to the blurred lines of the mid-century. Among the unrepentant Nazis stands Josef Rahnen. He is not a comrade in arms, though he stands with the bearing of a soldier. He is an Austrian Jew, a man who lost his family to the relentless machinery of the Holocaust, and a senior officer of Mossad. He is there to pay respects to a Nazi war criminal, a man who once served the very regime that sought Rahnen's own extinction. This image, a Jewish intelligence officer saluting a favorite of Hitler, captures the absolute moral disorientation of the 20th century. It is a tableau of the pragmatic and the profane, where the victim and the perpetrator are bound together by the cold necessities of espionage and survival, standing over a grave that holds more secrets than soil. However, the true story is not about who is present in that sweltering cemetery. It is about who is absent, the hollow spaces where the most intimate human connections should have been. In this crowd of admirers, former enemies, and professional shadow dwellers, there is a gaping void where a family should be. There are no weeping widows holding the hands of grieving grandchildren, no tender displays of a life shared in the quiet moments between the storms of history. There is no lineage stepping forward to claim the sword or uphold the name. To understand why Otto Skorzeny died surrounded by strangers and ghosts, we must understand how he lived not as a man of blood and soil, but as a man of utility and exploitation. For Skorzeny, human relationships were never about connection, warmth, or the slow building of a shared life. They were about acquisition, assets to be liquidated once their value had been spent. Go back to Vienna, May 1934. The city is a tinderbox of political unrest, and Skorzeny is young, scarred from student duels, and intensely ambitious. He is an engineer looking for a foundation, not just for a building, but for a life of power. He finds it in Margareta Schreiber, or rather, he finds it in the strategic potential of her father's scaffolding company. The marriage is a merger, a cold calculation disguised as a domestic union. Within 3 years, Skorzeny maneuvers with the precision of a corporate raider to secure a controlling interest in the business. He does not build the company, he occupies it. Once the asset is secured and his financial footing is firm, the partner becomes redundant. He divorces Margareta, keeping the company that would finance his ascent into the Nazi elite. He discards the woman but keeps the capital, a pattern of behavior that would define his entire existence. Margareta, however, proves resilient in a way Skorzeny never anticipated. She does not fade away into the bitterness of a discarded spouse. She remarries, she rebuilds, and she chooses the path of quiet dignity. She remains in Vienna, living a quiet, ordinary life, a stark contrast to the flamboyant, dangerous theatre of her ex-husband's career. She lives through the war, the occupation, and the reconstruction, finally dying in 2011 at the age of 97. She outlives the man who used her by 3.5 decades, a silent victor in a marathon of endurance. Her revenge was not vocal. It was merely the act of enduring long after his monuments had fallen, and his name had become a footnote of infamy. She survived him not by fighting, but by living a life that he, in his obsession with power, could never understand. By 1939, the war demands a different kind of asset, and Skorzeny's ambitions have outgrown the world of Viennese scaffolding. He requires political access, the kind that can only be found in the upper echelons of the Reich. He finds it in Emmy Linhart. She is the niece of Hjalmar Schacht, the architect of the German economic recovery and Hitler's finance minister. This union is a strategic alliance, a marriage of convenience that links the commando directly to the financial arteries and political nerves of the Third Reich. It provides him with the legitimacy and the reach he craves. In February 1940, Emmy gives birth to Waltraud, Skorzeny's only biological child, a daughter who should have been the anchor of his humanity. For a conventional man, a daughter is a legacy, a bridge to a future he will not see. For Skorzeny, she appears as little more than a footnote in a military dossier, a detail of his personal life that took a back seat to his exploits in the field. When the German front collapses in 1945 and the Thousand-Year Reich crumbles into dust, the family he built for status becomes a liability for survival. Skorzeny is captured, tried at Nuremberg for his unconventional warfare, and eventually acquitted, only to be detained again as a high-value prisoner. By 1948, he escapes with the aid of the SS Underground, the Odessa network. A fugitive moving through the shadows of a broken Europe cannot carry the baggage of a wife and a primary school-aged child. In 1950, he severs the tie with the same clinical efficiency he used in Vienna. He divorces Emmy, leaving her to navigate the ruins of her uncle's reputation and her husband's crimes alone. Here, the history books go blank, a deliberate erasure that speaks volumes. Emmy Linhart does not just leave the stage, she evaporates. There is no death certificate found in the usual archives, no record of a second marriage, no immigration file in the countries where former Nazis often sought refuge. The niece of a Reich minister simply ceases to exist in the public record, as if she chose to dissolve her identity rather than carry the weight of her associations. But the silence of the mother is nothing compared to the profound, impenetrable silence of the daughter. Walter Skorzeny was born into the shadow of a giant, a man whose face, scarred by a dueling blade, became the iconic image of Nazi daring. Imagine growing up in post-war Europe with that surname, a name that evoked the rescue of Mussolini and the infiltration of American lines. Every newspaper headline, every newsreel mentions your father as the scar-faced phantom, a man both hunted and admired in the murky waters of the Cold War. Other children of the Nazi elite chose to engage with their tainted inheritance. Gudrun Himmler spent her entire life defending her father, becoming a high priestess of neo-Nazi charity. Nicholas Frank spent his life condemning his, writing books of searing hatred to purge the blood of the butcher of Poland. They remained trapped, forever orbiting the black holes of their parents' crimes. Waltraut chooses a third option, perhaps the most devastating one for a man of Skorzeny's ego: total erasure. She marries, takes a new name, and steps out of history entirely. She grants no interviews to the journalists who tracked her father's every move. She writes no memoirs. She does not defend him against the accusations of history, nor does she denounce him to gain the world's favor. She denies him the oxygen of acknowledgement. In the modern age of digital surveillance and obsessive genealogy, she achieves the impossible. She remains invisible. We do not know if she had children, if the line continued in secret. We do not know if Otto Skorzeny's bloodline continues today, through a generation that has forgotten him. If there are grandchildren, they are likely walking the streets of Europe right now, carrying the genes of Hitler's favorite commando, perhaps entirely unaware of their burden. Waltraut's silence is a surgical procedure. She amputated her past to save her future, leaving her father a man with a name, but no people. Skorzeny, unburdened by the family he discarded, rebuilds his life in the sun-drenched sanctuary of Franco's Spain. It is the 1950s, a time when the world is reordering itself, and he needs a new partner for this new, opportunistic world. He finds Ilse Luthier. In a bizarre twist of fate, or a recurring psychological compulsion, she is also a niece of Hjalmar Schacht. The pattern repeats with haunting symmetry, but Ilse is different from the women who came before. She is not just a resource to be consumed, she is an operator in her own right. Together, they build a bizarre, twilight empire in Madrid, a hub for arms deals, real estate speculation, and the lingering threads of the old regime. They are the power couple of the exile circuit, living a life of luxury while the rest of Europe recovers from the wounds he helped inflict. Ilse manages the public image, the sprawling real estate in Mallorca, and the tourism investments in the Bahamas that washed the money of the past. Otto manages the shadows. He advises dictators in Argentina and Egypt, men who sought his expertise in the mechanics of repression. And, in the ultimate twist of opportunistic nihilism, he begins to work for the State of Israel. The ideology that had been his lifeblood was discarded when a better offer appeared on the table. The Mossad files, released decades later, confirm the depth of this betrayal. Through Ilse's social navigation, Israeli intelligence recruits Otto. The man who once wore the SS uniform with pride becomes a tactical asset for the Jewish state, using his reputation to intimidate German scientists in Egypt, who were building missiles to destroy Israel. It is a transaction of pure survival instinct, a dark comedy of the mid-century. Ideology is revealed as a flimsy garment. Loyalty is fluid, dictated by the bank account and the stay of execution. Ilse knows everything. She facilitates the meetings, she keeps the ledgers. She is the bridge between the Holocaust perpetrator and the Holocaust survivors. They live together in a moral vacuum where the only thing that matters is relevance and leverage. They were partners in a dance of shadows, but even the most intricate dance must end. But leverage is temporary. A flickering candle against the dark. Death is absolute. When cancer finally takes Otto in 1975, the bill he had been running up for decades finally comes due. The man who had liquidated everyone else's value was now a corpse, and the empire he built was revealed to be a house of cards, held together only by his presence. Ilse is left alone in the Madrid villa, a monument to a life of hollow success. She has no children of her own to provide comfort or continuity. Her stepdaughter has vanished into the mists of a new identity, unreachable and uninterested. The network of old comrades, the men who raised their arms at the funeral, are dying off or retreating into their own forgotten corners. She sits amidst a vast, chaotic archive that filled the rooms of their home. 60 years of history gathered in boxes and filing true in cabinets. There are letters from Himmler, chilling in their banality. There is the wristwatch Mussolini gave Otto on the mountain of Gran Sasso, a trophy of his greatest triumph. There are 13 passports used during his years as a fugitive, each representing a different lie. There are detailed reports of his work for Mossad, the ultimate proof of his duplicity. It is a treasure trove of the 20th century's darkest secrets, a legacy of paper and ink. And here lies the final, crushing irony of a life lived for self-interest. Skorzeny spent his entire existence extracting value from others, treating people as raw materials for his own advancement. In the end, his widow becomes the target of that very same extraction. Without the protection of the most dangerous man, Ilse becomes prey. A Spanish businessman enters Ilse's life as she drifts into the fragility of old age. He plays the role of the devoted friend, the only one left to care for a lonely, aging woman in a house full of ghosts. He manages her affairs, slowly tightening his grip on the remnants of the Skorzeny fortune. He isolates her from what few contacts she has left. In 1998, as her mind begins to fail, she signs over power of attorney. In 1999, she signs a will, leaving him everything: the properties, the money, and the archive. By the time Ilse dies in a nursing home around 2002, she is destitute. She is living on the charity of the very man who systematically dismantled her fortune, a final victim of the greed that she and Otto had cultivated together. The archive, the only thing that could have provided a coherent historical legacy, is not donated to a museum or a research institute. It is not studied by historians seeking to understand the mechanics of the 20th century. It is looted. The con artist who inherited it does not care for history. He cares for liquidity. He sells it off, piece by piece, at various auctions to the highest bidders. The unified record of a war criminal's life is shattered for quick profit, scattered into the hands of private collectors who prize the macabre over the meaningful. A passport here, a medal there, a letter sold to an anonymous buyer in America. The history is scattered to the winds, fragmented and lost. Much like the family itself, there is no center, no core, only pieces of a broken puzzle. Return once more to the cemetery in Madrid. The grave is there, a physical marker in a city of the dead. Group 32, row 7. But it is merely a stone, a cold slab in a foreign land. The ashes are interred in Vienna, in a family plot that feels more like a storage locker than a memorial, a place where he is technically present but spiritually absent. There is no pilgrimage of family, no flowers left by those who remember a father's kindness or a grandfather's stories. Otto Skorzeny built his life on the belief that power, ruthlessness, and the ability to manipulate others would grant him a kind of immortality. He believed that by being dangerous, he would be eternal. He was wrong. Power without humanity, relationships built on utility rather than love, leaves nothing but a vacuum. His first wife moved on and found peace in his absence. His second wife vanished into a self-imposed exile from history. His daughter erased herself so thoroughly that she became a ghost while still alive. His widow was consumed by the very predatory greed they had practiced as a pair. His secrets were sold to the highest bidder by a common thief. There is no Skorzeny dynasty. There is no great inheritance of spirit or substance. There is only a name carved in cold stone, visited by curious strangers, historical tourists, and a dwindling number of military enthusiasts. But it is a name utterly ignored by his own blood. The silence of his daughter is the final, unappealable verdict of history. In the end, the most dangerous man in Europe could not protect his legacy from the devastating, quiet judgment of indifference. He died as he lived, successful in his missions, but a failure in the only thing that survives the grave. Would you like me to analyze the specific historical parallels between Skorzeny's business tactics and his military strategies, as described in this narrative?